Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Hello everyone, this is Why the Long Face.
Good evening.
Welcome back.
So, Doctor, what we're going to be talking about this evening is, do antidepressants work?
Yes. Next.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Thanks for joining us on Why the Long Face. We'll see you next time.
Next on Why the Long Face, will the sun come up tomorrow? So, good news for anyone who's been prescribed antidepressants, but maybe we could dive a little bit deeper than those that three-letter summary that you gave us earlier, Doctor.
You want the caveats?
I want the caveats, and I want a bit more of an explanation, but from a layman's perspective. We don't want it to be a frigging Reese lecture. We just want just the basic facts to, I guess, give some people some comfort who are taking this kind of medication,
or just thinking about taking it.
Yeah, or have been asked to consider it, I guess.
No.
By the
I mean,
GP, because some people would find that a frightening prospect.
Yeah.
I would imagine. So
yeah, I think that's right. And it's not something that anyone should take lightly, I guess. If your GP has told you that you might need to take an antidepressant, you should seriously look into it. And I'm not here to tell you to take them. The title of this podcast is, do antidepressants work?
Correct.
And the answer is yes for the majority of people who take them, and with an added caveat, in clinical trials, randomized controlled trials, which is supposedly the gold standard of evidence in medicine. They will take people who've got depression and they'll give them either the antidepressant active drug or a placebo, and they'll compare responses to antidepressant versus placebo.
Will they tell people what they're taking? Obviously not.
No, they don't tell them, and they don't know themselves because they're blinded by someone else, an independent investigator.
That's what double blind means, right?
Yeah.
So the administrator of the experiment and the recipient are both unaware of what's being administered. That's double
but
blind.
they're getting the active drug or not.
Interesting stuff.
Right, and obviously the people who are rating the severity of their depression using standardised kind of instruments, right? Like the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale, for example.
Right.
Okay,
which we'll talk about in another episode. Actually.
We can talk about measuring. Yeah, the response rate for antidepressants, on the whole, is about double the placebo rate.
That's actually quite surprising.
It's about 66. About 2/3 of people will respond in your average clinical trial, and that's just obviously just one drug.
So they're only sort of twice as good as nothing. In fact,
yeah.
But you believe, no doubt, in the placebo effect. In other words, some people who are given anything, the very fact that they are getting a treatment will sometimes help their symptoms.
That's
what the placebo effect is. Right?
That's the placebo effect, and
Okay.
that is pretty high in all trials in psychiatry. So an expectation of recovery can be very powerful, just in and of itself, and maybe getting the extra added attention from researchers, having somewhere to go, someone to talk about how they're feeling, so they rate their symptoms and so on.
Maybe the comfort of acknowledging it as well.
The best trials have a follow-up period of about 12 months, but the longer the follow-up period, the more expensive the trial is, and the more difficult it is to run, obviously, and the higher dropout you'll get. But they carefully select people for these trials. You know, they're excluded if they take any street drugs, if they drink alcohol, that kind of thing. So actually, arguably, these trials are not sort of living in the real world, if you like. Yeah. So,
but even so, a double positive response rate is highly significant. So even from that perspective, they work. Do you think we can?
Yeah, and this is on average. So then you can. I mean, there's lots to it. You have to break down how do we define response versus remission. So there is a difference.
Yeah.
And also, do all individuals respond in the same way? Is it that people with a more severe depressive illness are more likely to respond than those with a milder severity?
I've heard that theory before, which sort of makes sense in a way. So the worse your condition is, the more likely drugs are to work. Makes sort of logical sense to a layperson, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's really encouraging, a 60% success rate, and that's on any drug. Because, of course, when you're actually prescribing antidepressants, you might try many different drugs for a particular patient. So perhaps the efficacy goes above 60% because you're you'll try different combinations. If one antidepressant doesn't work, it's likely that your doctor might prescribe you another one, which might be more effective.
Yes. So that's why I always refer to something called the STAR-D trial. Sequenced treatment alternatives to relieve depression. Bit of a mouthful. So that's why STAR-D. And this was a collaborative study on the treatment of depression funded by the National Institute of Mental Health in America. So this stepped treatment approach means if you don't respond to the first antidepressant, then you go to the next step, which is either a switch to another antidepressant or you augment with something else. Step 3, you have 2 antidepressants at once, or it basically has these different options for you.
Because it's extremely complex, the different types of antidepressant and the mechanisms in your brain that they're acting on. So it's incredibly unpredictable because it's such a complex system. There's a bit of trial and error. And
Correct.
And I think you're saying to patients they shouldn't be scared of that. They shouldn't be saying, this guy's just throwing a load of mud at the wall and seeing if anything sticks.
Right.
They're not actually doing that.
But the point of this study, and the reason I realise... no, you're right. We currently don't have any reliable way of predicting whether people are going to respond to a drug that primarily, in theory, works on the serotonin system, or one that primarily works on dopamine, say, or a combination of the two.
I know we don't want to get too technical, but what's the difference between the serotonin acting and the dopamine acting?
Right. So, well, there is some evidence that all 3 of the monoamines, serotonin, noradrenaline, and dopamine, they all contribute to varying degrees to the pathophysiology of depression, right?
Right.
So some kind of depletion going on.
In all 3,
and
or any combination.
And it's all indirect evidence coming from blood tests. They've taken, extract something from the cerebral spinal fluid or something, or look at the urinary excretia products of these neurotransmitters and so on to get some kind of index. Because, of course, you can't use an invasive way of measuring these brain chemicals in your brain. But it's all indirect evidence, and we know that it's probably more complicated than a drug acting on one neurotransmitter. Most of them act on all 3. A selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, implies that its main mode of action is on serotonin, but it is also having effects on the other 2. Because these systems are not completely independent of one another. I mean, these are tracks that start in the sort of older gut feeling part of the brain, and project forward to the frontal cortex. And there's something about that relationship between the frontal cortex, the kind of the part of the brain that's most evolved, of course, and is weighs up probabilities of action and thinks contains abstract reasoning. Inhibitory control of your emotions, which you learn as you mature. So it's the interaction between these things. Within a depressive illness, noradrenaline depletion might be more responsible for your difficulty concentrating, right? Depletion in serotonin might be more responsible for the abnormalities in your sleep pattern, difficulty either getting off sleep or waking up too early, or indeed waking up in the middle of the night, what we call middle insomnia. And the lack of dopamine affecting the pleasure thing and your motivation, your drive.
Can I try and summarise? Because I've heard about serotonin, and I obviously imagine an SSRI, allows you to have more serotonin, because serotonin makes you happy. What I'm hearing is, and that was very detailed explanation, was it's not as simple as that, and it never is, because it's the brain, the most complex thing in the universe.
No, because we've got other drugs that don't work on those 3, supposedly. Right, but probably work indirectly on them, like ketamine.
So what I was summarising, I was saying that these 3 neurotransmitters, they all do different things, but they overlap. You might say that serotonin has an effect on mood and your ability to sleep. You might say noradrenaline has more of a bias towards concentration, and dopamine to motivation, and you might always say that a particular deficit in one or all of those might colour the way your depression presents, but that the drugs tend to work on all of them to a greater or lesser extent, and that explains 2 things really for me. One, why people have so many different symptoms and there are a myriad of them because it's a bit like red, green, and blue. You can make any colour in the spectrum out of those three colours.
Yeah.
You can make any mood disorder out of a combination of any of those three neurotransmitters. That explains to a certain extent why you have to do a bit of trial and error with the drugs, because you can't necessarily predict where the deficiency lies.
Yeah, if you go into psychiatry thinking, I want to have nice, clean outcomes to all my interventions, don't do it.
Yeah,
because the brain is complicated, but also the neurochemistry of each individual person is unique.
So do you think that because the brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, your job is in a sense even harder than
apart from yours?
No, which is one of the simplest things. It sort of goes human brain, rat brain, monkey brain, rat brain, bird brain, Rubik's cube, my head, the rest of the world. I know that. So, but are you saying your job, you could say, is harder than a heart surgeon's? Because although a heart is quite a complicated organ, there are a lot less things that can go wrong. So that's why psychiatrists think they're so bloody good.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah.
You're much, much better at just randomly giving drugs to people until they feel better.
Correct. Taking one might say, an empirical approach to treatment. No,
but there is a serious point.
Only kidding.
There is a serious point.
We're forgetting
people might feel when they go to their doctor and they say, that didn't work, let's try this one. Right. They might think the doctor is just scattergun random. And I'm hoping this is kind of explaining why he or she will be doing that.
I think there is... No, of course there is some evidence base to the types of drugs we prescribe. Most doctors would say, OK, first depression, let's go for an SSRI. Now you're going to ask me to list them. I'll do my best.
I've got a list.
Go on then.
I've done my research.
I know them already. Paroxetine. Go on then. So the probably the most well-known one is Prozac, was the trade name. Came out it was the first. Oh no, it's second. Fluvoxamine was the first one, and then it was fluoxetine, otherwise known as Prozac, and that was a big thing in the early 90s. But since then we've had sertraline.
Yep.
Paroxetine.
Tick.
Citalopram.
Blimey, are you doing this from memory?
Of course.
This is extraordinary, Doctor. Carry on.
Escitalopram.
Yeah. That's it. Oh, no, there's one you haven't got. This is a great game, isn't it? Name the antidepressant.
Oh, God.
Fluvo.
No, I said fluvoxamine.
You've got it all.
That was before fluoxetine.
You've got every single one.
Of course I did. It's my job, man.
Well, even so, with all those long words. It was a clever.
Anyway, so one of those, and there isn't a heap of evidence to suggest that one of them, when you look at sort of meta-analyses, when you look at all the trial evidence, there is no reason to pick one over the other, really.
You sling out terms like meta-analyses because they sound clever.
Right.
Actually, I know what that means. Can I guess?
Yeah.
So meta is abstraction. So meta-analysis is like an analysis of analysis. In other words, of all the trials, analysis of all of them. Yes.
Correct.
I rock.
Using...
spreadsheets.
Using a systematic literature reviews first to try and pull out trials that use the same methodologies or good enough methodologies. So you chuck out all the ones that use crap methods, i.e. they didn't have double-blind, randomised controls as part of there. Yeah, and then you do a kind of analysis of all those of those findings. To have less noise and better quality evidence, you'd have one massive trial instead of compiling loads of small ones.
Yeah. I mean, what I know about data is the more data you have, the more the errors even out, which kind of stands to reason.
Right, because when you're compiling a lot of small studies, you have to make certain assumptions, like the patients are all fairly similar environments, and conducted in similar ways.
I like this. This is really getting my head around this. 3 neurotransmitters that can possibly cause the problem in all different amounts, and any drug that you might take helps with the amounts of any one of those neurotransmitters to an unspecified degree. So to a certain extent, it has to be a little bit trial and error, and that is not the doctor just being random.
If you don't respond to one SSRI, you may respond to another SSRI, which shows that it isn't as simple as, it just increases the availability of serotonin.
Yeah. And that all drugs work in the same way in a particular class.
So if you're someone who has a bit of a kind of neurochemical profile where dopamine is low as well as serotonin, then the surgery might work better for you.
Yeah. No, that's true. Anyway, now a word from our sponsor,
Yeah.
Procter and Gamble. Oh no, they don't. Do you
I
want to
don't
talk
know who
about
makes
any? Do you want to
surgery.
talk about other classes? We can talk about the SSRIs and the tricyclics.
Well, we've
which
got the
are all fashion.
monoamine oxidase inhibitors,
What about the SNRIs? Don't they come next logically?
if you like. They're the serotonin and noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors.
So I was guessing that they help with the balance of serotonin and noradrenaline.
So venlafaxine, otherwise brand name Effexor, is
That surely is one of
thought
Superman's
to be
mates. Superman and Effexor.
hung out with Skeletor.
Effexor.
It definitely is a good antidepressant, but again, it all depends on your side effect profile. So whenever we're prescribing, we're thinking about response, but we're also thinking about what you can tolerate.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why venlafaxine isn't necessarily your first line. It might well be your second line. So that's if your first antidepressant you try doesn't work.
Or give you side effects.
So
that you don't
going back to the original, yeah. So going back to that STAR-D trial, that was great because it was a big trial, biggest trial ever, and it was naturalistic. So it would be anyone in the community with depression. 47% of those responded, and about a third went into remission, which is completely recovered. And as you progressed through those steps, your response rate would be better.
Good.
Right?
Yeah, I understand. That's good.
So if you don't respond to one, then there's a good chance you'll respond to the next one.
Yeah. You might have a very resistant depression, which we'll talk about in another episode, I guess. But that's unlikely, which is it's quite an optimistic message that you're giving, Doctor. Okay, so what are the NASAs? The NASSAs. And it's a noradrenaline and specific serotogeneric antidepressants. That sounds really specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done my research.
So you've only got mirtazapine under that label.
Well, there's also Zizpin, but actually that's just the same thing. So
that's
yes,
the
you're
train
right.
name for mirtazapine.
Yeah, it is. How do you say mirtazapine so easily? It's so difficult for me to say. Oh well. That's because you're a doctor.
Yeah, and because that has a different mode of action again, it works actually a great deal on serotonin, but it works on different types of serotonin receptor. That's when it starts to get really boring because there's loads of different subtypes of receptors. So it's not just serotonin receptors versus noradrenaline receptors.
Oh, right, got it.
Within serotonin class, there are then lots of receptors, and some of them are on the pre-synaptic membrane, some are on the post-synaptic membrane.
Which is a place we don't want to go. I think it's
Well,
enough to know.
probably not.
I think it's enough to know it's complicated, and
Yeah.
and it's complicated and very difficult to, because it is the brain you're trying to measure, very difficult to measure. So I think we should be comforted by the fact that the thing is complicated, and yet we know that there are 3 neurotransmitters which can cause us problems, and there are many, many, many different drugs which can help us.
Right. So, and the other thing to remember is psychiatrists are clinicians. They're not pharmacologists. So they're not actually interested in what receptor profile this particular drug has. What they're interested in is what the actual clinical trials show. How well is this drug tolerated? It may be marketed as the most amazing SSRMA ever, right? Oh God, an amazing mode of action. But if people vomit when they take it, they're not going to keep on taking it. I've become increasingly sceptical of drug company claims from a completely unique mode of action. I've been hearing for 20 years this new antidepressant works way faster than all the other ones. They never do. Their original trial might suggest that, but then when psychiatrists go off and do independent trials that are not funded by pharmacology companies, then the truth comes out. And also just through clinical experience. That mass of clinical experience of psychiatrists prescribing and seeing what happens to their patients, that informs their practice. And it should.
Yeah, it often seems strange to me that pharmaceutical companies would use the kind of advertising that you'd use on the general public when they're advertising to specialists, highly responsible specialists who know their shit. Because you'd have thought you wouldn't be susceptible to that. Do you think the psychiatric community can be?
You have to take a pragmatic view because you need to know about every new drug that's coming on the market. You do need to know about that because there is a chance that this could be the first antidepressant that gets you well in 2 days, whatever. And every antidepressant up till now, you've observed that it takes 4 to 6 weeks to achieve its peak therapeutic effect, right? Pharmaceutical companies are not criminal conspiracies. That's the other thing to say. I mean, they are. Yes, they need to make a profit, but they are fundamentally, I think, driven by wanting to produce a drug that's going to help people.
I think they want both, and there's nothing
they
wrong
want.
with that.
They want, but they definitely need to market what they've developed in order to retrieve the extortionate amounts of money that it costs to set up and run a clinical trial.
And is it also true that it's not only a massive cost, but it's a big gamble, to use a gambling analogy?
It's millions and millions of pounds.
Because you've got to place a lot of bets. There's absolutely no guarantee that adding another molecule to this already efficacious molecule is going to make a better result.
Right.
And
so there's definitely trial and error going on in their laboratories to a degree. They might go, okay, let's modify this molecule slightly, and it's very difficult to predict. And then, of course, they have to do a big leap of faith when they go from animal models, and receptor profiles and all that sort of thing, receptor binding, to going, oh, in theory this should work, to doing the first human trials, which cost a lot of money. Completely doesn't work,
And there's only a limit to the amount of length of the patent as well, which is another variable that goes into the big spreadsheet of pharmaceutical companies.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's not, I suppose, it's not for psychiatrists to go, well, I'm not going to even entertain the idea that there is a new drug that could be better than the previous drug.
No.
You're going to listen to what they've got to say, look at the data, and then wait for the independent evidence to come out often. That is why individuals sometimes get very frustrated, because they're thinking, well, God, we know this drug exists, why can't you just prescribe it?
Again, that's the job of the clinician, and it's a thankless task sometimes, but it's I imagine, because you've got to weigh up that this might be a new miracle drug with it might not be.
Right.
It might be.
Well, the new miracle drugs at the moment are ketamine. People often think of it as a horse tranquilizer, but it's actually been used in human medicine for decades.
And also as a recreational drug.
It's a recreational drug. And psilocybin is the other one, which is the extract from what we call magic mushrooms in common parlance, right? Probably even more controversial. I know less about psilocybin, but I've met researchers in this country at a high level that are looking at ketamine in treatment of depression, and it can dramatically improve someone's mood within 24 hours, often within hours.
Which brings me to another point, because a lot of antidepressants do take a long time to act. It's always amusing that when a drug has an association with recreational use, it's more a harder push. They're all drugs. These are all chemicals that have an effect on the brain, negative or positive.
It's still, I think, not a controlled drug, and is still used and it's been used medicinally for ages. It was originally developed as a short-acting anaesthetic by the US military. What the aim was to sort of have a disconnect between the pain sustained on the battlefield from an injury and the emotional reaction to it, and get those people off the battlefield so they can get up and walk off, rather than have to be stretchered off in some cases.
You mean lessening the pain, or lessening the emotional reaction to the pain?
Emotional reaction to the processing of the pain. There's a kind of disconnect at that point. So it dissociates the actual pain at the basic sensory level from the kind of processing of that at the higher cognitive level. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems it's sort of doing something similar with depression. It's sort of it's breaking the cycle between the gut feeling part of the brain and the frontal lobe that does all the ruminating. It's somehow disassociating the two for long enough to have some kind of
That's extraordinary.
I know.
For the record, my face is looking quizzical.
It's only a theory, right? But it sort of makes sense that it's dissociating the thoughts from the pain, the emotional pain, in some way.
CBT,
giving your thoughts time to catch up.
CBT is predicated on the fact that cycles of thought lead to an emotional reaction, and you want to break that chain between negative cycles of thoughts. Is this a sort of pharmacological equivalent, or am I stretching the analogy a bit far?
Possibly. But but what is definitely true is that people are getting better from their depression after a simple one intravenous infusion of this ketamine within hours, and the effect peaking at sort of one day, and then gradually tailing off over days, or in some cases after a couple of weeks, after just one dose. So it's almost rebooting the brain. It's doing a kind of reset.
But then reverting.
Then reverting. So that is the issue.
Could you use ketamine if someone is severe depression, suffering horribly, whilst an SSRI, for example, kicks in?
That is definitely something that I've thought about.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Do we talk about monoamine oxidase inhibitors as
one
well?
other quick thing.
Oh, yeah, go on.
It massively reduces suicidal ideation.
I mean, that's got to be saving lives, literally.
Yeah. So I think it is exciting.
Yeah.
But what we've got at the moment is a collection of small trials, and that probably don't meet NICE guidance for recommendation. So it's still at a research stage. But you've got big pharma coming in now with a nasal preparation of ketamine.
Oh, really? Presumably because
Johnson & Johnson.
that gets into the bloodstream quickly.
And they're doing big trials of people, so they've already got, very strong results from the acute treatment of the condition of depression, and they're now moving on to maintenance, which is how do we maintain this improvement with repeated doses,
And we know
how frequent those doses need to be, etc.
We now break for a word from our sponsor,
Johnson & Johnson.
I thank you.
Thank you for the wine you provided this evening.
And
Touraine Sauvignon Blanc.
And the ket.
I thought there was a reason why you weren't as tired as usual.
I'm trialing for Johnny and Johnny.
Mm.
So, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, interesting, boring? Are we going too deep?
No, not necessarily, if you want to mention it.
Well, it's
Tranylcypromine, what's the other ones?
There's three more. Isocarboxazid.
Yes, that was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. And phenylzine.
No, phenolzine.
And of course, selegiline as well.
Selegiline.
All right, selegiline. More emphasis on the E. What's a monoamine? Are they the three that we talked about?
They're the three we talked about.
Oh, thank God for that. I thought it was another class of chemical that was going to drive
They
the
inhibit.
F-wording
Listen to
mental.
this, man. This is very easy to understand.
Yeah, go on.
They inhibit the enzyme called monoamine oxidase, which breaks down all three.
No way. I think this is great. I think this is really.
Unfortunately, it means you can't. There were dietary restrictions and things like that with them. That's why they fell out of favour.
It's a little bit like photography. There's always a compromise. Like with photography, you've got the amount of light, the speed of the film, the shutter speed, and the aperture.
True.
And you've got to balance it all together to get the best
True.
result.
True. But nevertheless, there will be some patients individuals out there that have not responded to the other classes of antidepressant, and they respond to that.
Yeah. That's great. I'm writing down as we go the lessons that we want to, and I'll do a conclusion at the end.
Oh,
there's
please
certain
do.
lessons. Yeah, I think because there's certain things that...
You're good at conclusions.
Oh, you're very kind. Well,
Except when you get it wrong, but mostly you're good at them.
You're good at conclusions, and they always sound good, even when they're wrong.
Oh, yes.
So I think what we've concluded is they don't work, and you should snap yourself out of it.
Oh, yes.
No, that was a joke. So
yes.
I've got
Ignore
some
your
questions.
doctor.
Ignore your quack. And they're 17 years of...
No, of course there are alternative ways of getting better to antidepressants. And, of course, it's not an either-or thing. Antidepressants plus good diet plus exercise plus having some CBT or other forms of therapy. Again, not everyone responds to CBT. You have a different type of therapy. But anyway, and thinking about signposting, thinking about were you going in the right direction when you got depressed? I mean, some people just get spontaneously depressed and you're like, oh, well, bad luck. They've got big biological loading, but other people, maybe they shouldn't be in that relationship or shouldn't be in that particular job, or those sort of things need to be thought about way more than they're thought about.
I had a really interesting discussion with someone at work about biological loading, and he's a guy, very alpha, very talented, very intelligent, very sort of gung-ho in everything he does, and must win. It's not you. No, this guy's good looking. He's successful with ladies, but he's the kind of guy who sort of pushes himself to the limit. And you wonder, when people are particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing, do they sometimes push themselves to the limit anyway and get close?
I don't think the alpha or the good looking or anything like that has got anything to do with it. the reason people push themselves sometimes to exhaustion is because of the need for validation that they didn't get from possibly their parents when they were growing up.
Blimey. Thank you, Siegmund. By the way, thanks for
He
the
talks
feedback,
as someone
everybody. On the
who
Freud
became
episode.
a doctor to please his mother.
All right. Well, welcome to Why the Long Face, the irony edition.
No. Listen, most of us are trying to get validation from our parents for way into our 30s. And then we suddenly go, actually, nah, I'm not going to do that anymore because I don't really enjoy it. I'll do something else. Or, look, just by chance, they're doing something they enjoy anyway. So
And I'm not sure, because as my father would say, you've always been a disappointment, Oliver. Why can't you be more like your friend Paul?
You're still trying to get his validation.
I am.
Yeah.
Love me, Daddy. Anyway, I don't think he gets podcasts. So I think I'm going to be okay. I have some more questions.
No, it's what he's waiting to hear.
No.
Right, go on.
Daddy, do you like my podcast?
It's getting...
Daddy?
Can we go back to antidepressants? I'm feeling
Daddy.
a bit uncomfortable.
Your mum made you psychotic. Good. Well, I'm glad she did.
Can we just stick to drugs being the cure for all?
All right. So, what do you say to a client who says to you, "I'm worried, I'm anxious as it is and depressed, but I'm particularly worried about you prescribing me a mind-altering drug," which is a kind of a scary way of describing an antidepressant. This thing is going to alter my mind, maybe alter my personality. I'm scared of taking it. How do you talk a client down from that kind of mindset, which is understandable?
I would probably say something along the lines of, you should try this drug. We'll give it a trial. It is designed to reverse a problem with the brain chemistry that has caused the symptoms you've got right now. And let's face it, you're not functioning very well. And
remind them of that.
Okay, so what we're trying to do, the aim here, is not to give you some kind of happy pill. We're trying to restore normal functioning. So we're trying to reverse the what's happened as a result of prolonged stress and depletion, in theory, of these monoamines, which is the best theory we've got. They might say, okay, well, I don't want anything messing around with my brain chemistry. I'll say, well, okay, forget about the chemistry. Just look at the evidence. These medications stop people suffering and get them back to work. Do you not want to function better?
I think it's the case, but I'd prefer you to say it because people believe what you say because you're immensely qualified, is that there is nothing about the antidepressants that you would prescribe or that are generally available which will alter the wiring of the brain or the chemistry of the brain permanently. None of the actions that you will feel as a result of being on an antidepressant would be permanent in any way.
Well, I can't open up your head and have a look. What I advise is that your depression is such a severity that I think antidepressants are probably needed. You're no longer functioning. You're unable to perhaps engage with psychological work, and what the antidepressant is doing is giving you a lift up to the point where you've got enough psychic energy to actually engage with other types of intervention like psychic energy, mental energy.
Better.
It's the same thing.
Is that what the crystals give you?
Yeah. Well, it gives you enough mental energy to engage with the crystals or whatever you think might
the dream
be
catchers.
an enhancement
Yeah.
to your life. God, if an antidepressant permanently altered your brain networks for the better so that you were more resilient, wouldn't that be great? And some people, of course, continue on antidepressants long term because they've had 2 or 3 or more episodes of cyclic depression, and the antidepressants prevent you from making you more resilient.
Is that a bad thing in
I don't think it is.
Because I'd imagine some people will be resistant to being on drugs for years. I don't
think it is. I think I
digressed
digressed a bit because you were asking about brain plasticity, and we're still learning about that all the time. I mean, I think that the idea that an antidepressant would cause permanent changes to your brain, I don't buy it. I think the longer you're on an antidepressant of certain types, the more difficult it might be to avoid some withdrawal symptoms. But once you get past those, which generally lasts a couple of weeks, I think you're okay. The risks and benefits might be different for different people.
I mean, that's the thing that comes out, isn't it? The fact that it's complex. The way the drugs works is complex, and each individual person's case is complex.
Yeah.
I've got another question for you. It's a big one. I find this really interesting, and I have a lot of sympathy for this point of view. I'm a believer in antidepressants from talking to you and seeing the data. However, I don't want to give the impression that...
And people right, you've benefited.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to give the impression that we think, right, you're depressed, drugs. Could it be that we've discussed why these shouldn't be called happy pills, because they're not exactly like
not
alcohol.
designed to make you... They're not going to give you a buzz.
Yeah. However...
Hence, they don't have much of a street value.
That's a good point, actually. If that was the case, everyone would be on Prozac, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Got any Prozac, mate?
Yeah.
Got Prozac. Got any venlafaxine?
I mean, Prozac did have a
Got
street
any Venla?
value for a while, but mainly because of its rep.
Right.
Mainly because of its image.
Right.
But it doesn't... If you go out there and take some Prozac, it's not going to give you an instant buzz.
That's a good point.
In fact, it might just make you feel a bit nauseous.
And not be able to get a hard on.
No, that's not a thing with SSRIs generally.
Oh, right, okay.
Delayed ejaculation is a thing.
Is that a good? That could be a good thing.
Could be a good thing.
It's the whole ep itself. Anyway. My point is my point.
We're doing a whole ep on side effects.
Yeah, we are. So anyway, my question was: people might worry that you're giving me these drugs, doctor, to make me feel better. Awesome, but my depression is caused by some deep-rooted thing, maybe from my childhood, that I don't understand or haven't explored.
Yeah.
Is there a concern that you're just masking this with drugs, and actually I'm not getting to the root cause?
No, the point is it's not either or. So and also knowing how you got into a prison cell doesn't necessarily help you understand how to get out of it, because you may have got to where you are with a depressive illness because of things that happened in your childhood, but understanding and processing and working through what happened in your childhood isn't necessarily going to lift your depression in the short term, in the acute phase. If you have a very severe depression, I think then you treat it with antidepressants to get to a point where you can engage in longer term psychodynamic therapy to explore those issues from your childhood, or CPT, which also does that.
I think that is quite a brilliant explanation, which I've never thought of.
Really? Because
Yeah.
you were scowling at me.
No, that was my concentration face. Knowing how you got into a cave or a hole doesn't necessarily help you get out of it. And I think it's very, very useful. And it brings one question to my mind, and that is, if people are suffering from depression and you pharmacologically treat them, you treat them with drugs, and they get better, do you always explore what the cause of the depression was by psychotherapeutic methods to understand how they got into the hole? Or do you sometimes say, well, they have a propensity to depression, this combination of drugs or this single drug helps them, happy days?
Well, and the answer is, of course, it absolutely depends on the individual.
Yeah.
You knew that when you asked it. So some people will have a heavier biological loading, and you can point to people in their family who've had recurrent depressions through their lives.
And of course, you'll take that into account. You'll ask
take
about
that into
blah, blah,
account,
blah.
and you'll ask about previous depressions they've had, but you'll also ask about current stresses. As I said to you before, it's the 3x3 grid, right?
Oh, I love that.
And you loved it then, and it's worth repeating.
It certainly is, if it's a 3x3.
It's biological, psychological, and social factors, which would include current stressors and life difficulties, right? Yep. Yeah, the one that
on one axis
that keeps straining. You want to do it the other?
Yes, yeah. You know I do. Stop teasing me.
Predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating.
We're going to have to draw
the
this up.
3 Ps.
We're going to have to draw this up. I'll draw it up.
You said this last time. You never did it.
Very, very busy, mate.
Quite lazy.
Management consultancy.
I'm lazy as well.
What's the... Oh, God, I took notes last time we did this, and the episode never went out because the sound quality was poor because our engineer didn't exist. So I don't think this one's gone out. So,
with the grid?
Yeah, I'm going to recreate the grid.
No, we did the Johari's window, the 2x2.
Yeah, that's a 2x2 Johari's windows.
We didn't do the 3x3.
3x3. I've heard people say on the internet, my dad tried antidepressants and it fucked him up. Right. And you just hear that kind of phrase on the internet and people go, oh my God, and immediately they start to think, oh, antidepressants can fuck you up.
We need more detail, and antidepressants are not going to suit every individual. if you've got, or rather, not every antidepressant is going to suit every individual as well. But I think where we're going with this is that the treatment of depression is way more tailored than people think.
Yeah.
You know, as long as you're seeing someone who's a professional, they will work with you. It is not a dictatorial thing. They will work with you to find something that suits you.
Well, let's try and summarise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be good.
This has been a very good ep because it could have been very dry and we could have gone through a load of drugs and
about neurochemistry
and all that
mode
shizzle.
of action and stuff.
What I've heard tonight is quite optimistic messages in terms of the use of antidepressants, in the fact that they work, their effects won't be permanent.
No.
The fact that you might have to work with your doctor to find the correct regimen is not a bad thing, and it's explainable by the fact that brain chemistry is complex.
Correct, and very variable across individuals.
Indeed. So the one thing that makes human beings wonderful is that we're all individuals, is that all our brains are individual.
Correct, unique.
Unique,
Absolutely unique, each one.
And therefore the way that brain chemistry works is unique, and therefore, sadly, if you're
Not only your brain chemistry, but how it interacts with your psychological and social factors. That's going to be unique.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good thing, really.
Yes, and that's what makes psychiatry interesting but frustrating and not simple.
And the fact that in clinical trials with a single drug, 60% versus 30%, roughly, active drug versus placebo, effective in lifting the mood of people with varying degrees of depression, is a very, very good sign that indeed, yes, antidepressants do work. However, it must be said that because of the complexity of the brain chemistry and because of the different actions on each of the neurotransmitters that the drugs have, sometimes some experimentation may be required with the cooperation of the clinician and the client.
Right.
The client should not be frightened by that and must realise that
to get to the one that you need.
Yes, sir. And indeed the combinations that you need. And what the doctor is doing with you is not random throwing mud to the wall and seeing what sticks, but very sensibly going through a well understood set of interventions that will almost certainly eventually help the patient. The personality change is certainly not a necessary part of it, and the action of the drug is almost certainly not irreversible. The other thing I hear is some of these drugs, by their very nature, do take some time to become efficacious, and you must take your time when taking these drugs.
And remember that side effects can often be worse in the early stages of treatment and then fade over time. So it's a bummer. It's a double bummer, actually. If you're not warned about this, you're going to stop your medication early because you say, I'm just getting side effects and no benefit.
Yeah.
The benefit, it happens later.
And I think we're probably saying that if you fear that the reason that you're getting depressed, and yet indeed there may be a reason that you're getting depressed, may be masked by some pharmacological intervention, can be an ill-founded fear, in that once you get better, you're in a better place to investigate the possible causations of you feeling this way.
Right, and do your own therapy, and do your own, get to the point where you've worked through some of the issues that possibly got you where you were. There's a wonderful synergy that happens when you get enough mental energy as a result of the antidepressant to start engage with psychological and social interventions that then leads to this a good long-term recovery, right? So it's not about just taking an antidepressant and carrying on as you were necessarily. Right?
Which answers my previous question about it masking.
Right, which I don't think it does, although I wouldn't speak for every individual.
And a good psychiatrist will realise that. And by the way, actually, something else...
And you can tail off the antidepressant after 6 months of wellness if it's your first depression. That is generally the way we look at it, is that it's the first 6 months from the point that you've got better that you're most at risk of relapse if you stop the medication. But you can talk to your doctor about stopping it after that time.
And this brings me to something else, right? So it sounds more and more like the relationship you have client to doctor is so important that I guess the client has the right to say this relationship isn't working for me. I'd like to try a relationship with another doctor.
Oh yeah, yeah. But the one thing you mustn't do is just kind of ignore it, really. I think, you know, and be willing to take advice.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing as well.
I mean, there's a temptation to think that you can get out of your own depression. I think it takes a lot to admit that maybe you need some help with it.
Yeah.
Because it's an illness like any other.
And the irony is, I guess, you get yourself into such a low position of depression that even if you could think your way out of it, you're so low in your abilities to function psychologically
that you can't pick yourself up off the floor.
Cool.
Okay, that's a good one. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, enjoyed it, man. Take care, and open yourself up to the possibilities of antidepressants being your way to...
we ain't no pusher men, but consider it. Hey, thanks for joining us on Why the Long Face. As ever, we're here to inform, hopefully, and entertain, but we're not here to give you medical advice. There is, however, information on our website, ytlf.com, that's whytlf.com, about where to get help. See you next time.